Earlier this year, the British Standards Institution, on behalf of the OHSAS Project Group, submitted a new work item proposal to ISO, and we were very pleased to hear in June that the proposal had been accepted. We think this is largely in part because of the results of the OHSAS Standards and Certificates Survey that was conducted last year. This shows that there are about 40 international versions of OHSAS 18001 that have been adopted by different countries. It also shows there are about 90,000 certificates worldwide that have been issued in about 127 countries. So that really demonstrates a pressing need for an international standard in this area. The first thing I would say to people is don't panic. Given ISO's formal development processes and the stages of development we have to go through, my expectation is that we will not see this ISO standard on health and safety being produced until about 2016. So don't panic, and I'm sure that in 2016 there will also be additional time given to organisations to convert their 18001 certification into the new ISO certification. The main change is going to be this application of Annex SL. Annex SL provides a number of concepts that users of 18001 will already be very familiar with. So for example, there are issues such as setting policies, setting objectives, conducting internal audits, doing management reviews, requirements for continual improvement. All of that is very familiar. There are three particular new concepts that are slightly strange. One is called context of the organisation, another is about leadership, and a third is on documented information. One concept that's missing that people might question where it's gone to is about preventive action. I'll try and explain a little bit about these. Context of the organisation is about asking your organisation to look at those internal and external factors that might impact on your organisation's business. Things such as changing labour relations, new technologies, new materials. What is it that's coming from either outside or inside your organisation that might fundamentally change the way you do things? You're then required to look at the risks that those changes might introduce to your business, and then you're asked in a later clause to examine how those risks can be controlled through your management system. Because we are now using the management system to control risks, it's considered that the whole management system has become a preventive tool, and therefore there is no longer a need for a specific clause on preventive action. Leadership, again, there have been various clauses and requirements on top management, but leadership in itself has always been a problem to writers of management system standards. It's very difficult to convert the ideas around good leadership into objectively accessible and auditable requirements in a standard. We've tried, we've had elements such as insisting that top managers shall set a policy and objectives and communicate these. And those elements are still present under this new clause of leadership, along with other elements such as encouraging staff and assisting lower orders of management within the organisation. The last new item is documented information. We've traditionally in the management standards had reference to documentation or to records. That really doesn't take account of the modern business world where most of us walk around with smartphones, tablets, PDAs, where we're not looking at pure data, we're looking at processed information. So from a management system point of view, we need to make sure that that processed information is correct. So we have a new clause about documented information. It's quite an awkward term, but it's the best we could come up with. To try and move us forward into the modern world, it will still incorporate the concepts of documentation and records. that's really the Annex SL changes. Annex SL, in my view, will represent something like 30 to 40% of any future ISO management system standard. The reference on this slide gives you the URL where you can go and download a free copy of the ISO IEC directives, and where you can look at this Annex SL text today. You don't need to wait for the standard to come along. So already today you can see what 30 to 40% of the content might be in the future. Looking at OHS specific items that might change in the future, we've got things like the definition of risk. There are a number of standards on OHS internationally which have slightly divergent different definitions of risk. We're going to have to renegotiate the definition of risk in OHSAS 18001. Similarly, the concept of the worker or the person working under the control of the organisation causes awkwardness amongst different countries. They have different legal constraints about it, as does the definition of the workplace. What is the workplace? Is it just your organisation's own site? What about if you are a servicing organisation, you send people out to service equipment at other people's sites? What is your responsibility there? We also have the issue of outsourcing, which is becoming much more prevalent in management system standards. What is your responsibility for the health and safety of your outsourced organisation or your contractor? Another issue that's coming up is we start OHSAS 18001 by talking about hazard identification. Well, hazard identification is very manufacturing or hardware oriented, especially as more and more of us are working in service industries. So there's some thought that really we should start talking about risk identification and risk control rather than hazard identification. So these are some of the flavours of the OHS things that are going to change. Personally, I believe that if we can get the delegates to this new ISO committee to understand that we're dealing with business risk rather than strict legal compliance, then we might be able to move forward quite easily. So for example, if I was to say, what would be the damage to your reputation if one of your subcontractors or your outsourced suppliers created a major OHS incident? Would they be held liable, or would it be your organisation that was being identified as being responsible? In that situation, think of the BP situation last year in the Gulf. It was the organisation itself that was identified as being responsible. So that's the business risk that we're trying to control through OHSAS 18001. What about preparing for the future then? What should you do if this new standard's coming along? Well, as I mentioned before, I'm not expecting it to appear before about 2016. So if you're an existing user of OHSAS 18001, I would say don't panic. I've also tried to describe how many of the concepts in the standard will be the same and be very familiar to you, although they might be described in slightly different words and presented in a slightly different sequence. There will of course be a few new concepts that you'll have to take on board or adjust to, such as this context of the organisation. And unfortunately, I believe there will be some administrative changes you'll need to make to the documentation that supports your system. So there will be some small cost in that area. If you're new to OHS management systems and you're thinking, should I leap in with OHSAS 18001 now, or should I wait for the new standard? Well, you know, the new standard's going to be at least 3 years away, and why not take the benefits that having OHSAS systems in your organisation could give you now? By that, there's you could get yourself familiar with the underlying concepts of OHS management practices as defined in OHSAS 18001. That in turn can improve your OHS performance and that in itself can lead to things like reduced insurance premiums, as well as avoiding downtime, reduced worker injury or accident, etc. It enables you to improve your relationship with regulatory bodies such as the Health and Safety Executive. They're more likely to be more lenient about the rate at which they come and surveil your organisation and its OHS system, and if there are problems that arise, they'll probably deal with you on a more constructive basis if they think that you've been proactive and put in a good OHS system in your place. How can you keep informed of what's going to happen? NQA will be issuing information briefings. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.